Welcome to my book on a page summary of Emergence by Steven Johnson. This video is going to be slightly more than just a book on a page summary. I want to take the opportunity to reflect on the visual thinking workshop as Cohort 1 is quickly coming to an end. And to remind you, the visual thinking workshop takes the participants through a 6-step process of reading a book, creating highlights, processing the literature notes, creating the book on a page, storing the key learnings in your personal knowledge management system, and finally showcasing your book on a page. Cohort 1 selected Steven Johnson's Emergence as the book to read, and this video is my presentation of the book itself, and then later on I'm just going to share a couple of reflections from the book as well as from the workshop itself. The book is about intelligence, personality, and learning that emerges from the bottom up. As I was reading the book, I realized that I myself am a strong believer in the myth of the ant queen. Not in the sense of thinking about ant colonies. There I understand that it's a self-organizing organism and the queen doesn't have authority over all the ants. But in terms of my assumption that whenever I see intelligent collective behavior, it implies to me some kind of centralized authority figure. And as it turns out, this is not the case in many of the situations that we face in our life. This includes our thinking and our brain. It includes the way cities are self-organized, and it also includes online communities and social networks. So let's start by clarifying some basic terms. First of all, let's talk about complexity theory. Complexity theory was coined by Warren Weaver in 1948, and he talked about 3 different types of systems. He talked about simple systems that involve a couple of variables, and this, for example, could be the rotation of planets. Then he talks about disorganized complexity, which involves millions or even billions of elements. However, these can only be described with statistical means, and the examples you can see here is the physics of water vaporization or the statistics of accidents on the road. And then there's the category of organized complexity, and here the example is how a seed develops into a plant. As a 4th category, Steven introduces emergent complexity without adaptation, and he mentions the intricate crystals formed by snowflakes, which are beautiful but have no function. The book is about organized complexity that is able to adapt. There are 5 principles that enable macro intelligence and adaptability in any self-organizing complex system. First, more is different. A critical mass is required for the colony to be able to make intelligent assessments of its global state. Second, sophisticated macro behavior emerges as the sum of the micro motives through various feedback loops, yet the individual agents are ignorant of the resulting whole. Third, a high number of random encounters are essential for individuals to be able to gauge and alter the macro state of the system itself. A very high number of encounters also ensures that the system does not get stuck in a state of local optimum. Fourth, agents must be able to identify patterns in the signs they receive from their peers and the environment. For example, in case of an ant colony, smelling the pheromones of 50 foragers in a space of an hour imparts information about the global state of the colony. And finally, individuals only need to pay attention to their neighbors. However, through the many encounters and the attention to patterns, such local information can lead to global wisdom. Beyond the definitions of complexity theory and the 5 principles, there are 2 more concepts that you should keep in mind. First, that complex behavior can emerge from surprisingly simple rules. Think of a swarm of birds. It's amazing to think that with only 3 simple rules, you can simulate this behavior. Rule number 1 is don't hit your friends, meaning fly in a way that you avoid collision. Rule number 2 is fly in the same general direction as you see your peers flying. And rule number 3 is don't get left behind. If you do so, you might be picked off by predators. If you apply these 3 rules, you will end up with a highly adaptable simulation that you can present with surprises, and it's going to move in a very natural way, like a swarm of birds. The second is the principle of feedback loops. The example presented in the book is the scandal that emerged around the Bill Clinton-Jennifer Flowers affair in the early 1990s. As the story goes, ABC News had an interview with Bill Clinton, and the reporter asked him about the affair with Jennifer Flowers because just the night before, Jennifer Flowers came public on the affair, and on this interview, Bill Clinton denies the affair. The national news agencies like ABC or NBC or CNN have decided that this story is not newsworthy, so on the first night, this part of the interview did not get into the mainstream media. However, the next evening, because local news agencies had access to all the recordings of CNN through a contract signed back in the 1980s, local news agencies have decided that this is newsworthy, and they came public with the news. And as a consequence, once the news was aired, the national news agencies had no other choice but to also come public on the news, and this created a positive feedback cycle that resulted in a scandal. In self-organizing systems, positive feedback loops, but actually even more so negative feedback loops, are essential, and the balance of these feedback loops will keep a balance in the system called homeostasis, and that is a very important term whenever we talk about these self-organizing systems. So let's now look at 3 examples of self-organization at work. We're going to look at brains, cities, and the internet. So first, talking about our brains, in the book, Stephen goes into a discussion about how our brain is formed of millions of neurons connecting to one another, creating a positive feedback loop, and how the absolute refractory period of neurons, the fatigue of neurons, acts as a negative feedback loop, and how all of this is important to keep the homeostasis of the brain. However, the point I want to highlight here, so this is not covered on the book on a page, the point I want to cover here is a very interesting experiment that is discussed in the book, and that is about us being capable of forming self-organizing groups called communities. And the theory suggests that we are only conscious of our own thoughts because we first evolved the capacity to imagine the thoughts of others. So in the human brain, there's a big simulation running all the time. And in this simulation, we are simulating how others might think and act in a certain situation. And we adapt our own behavior based on the result of that simulation. There's an interesting experiment that was done with small children. In the experiment, the children see as the researchers take a box of Smarties, they remove the candy from the box, and they put pencils in the box and then close the box and put it on the table. And then an unknowing adult comes to the room, and the children are asked what the adult will expect to find in the box. 4-year-old children are able to accurately predict that the adult will expect to find candy in the box, since from the outside the box looks like a Smarties box, and the adult doesn't know that previously the researcher has replaced the candy with pencils. However, 3-year-old children will respond in exactly the opposite way. They will assume that the adult also knows that the candy was replaced, and they cannot make that distinction of what they know and what the adult knows. So this is an example or an experiment that demonstrates how between the age of 3 and 4 we develop the capability to simulate others, which is a core capability for us to be able to act in communities, to be able to act self-organizing systems. The second group of examples discussed extensively in the book involve cities. Apparently, Steven Johnson was reading The Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs at the time of writing this book. And in her book, Jane Jacobs talks about the importance of the sidewalk as the place where city life happens and where neighborhoods are formed, because it is on the sidewalk where people can exchange information with one another and can adapt their behavior. For example, there's a discussion about how businesses and neighborhoods of businesses are formed. This is how butchers will end up in one part of town, lawyers in the other, artists in a third part of town. The process is pretty simple. The business will look for a location where there's already a group of customers who are interested in their business. However, on balance, they don't want to be too close to other businesses to avoid too strong competition. And through these simple rules, neighborhoods get formed. The interesting thing is that neighborhoods are very stable over time. So when you take a city that is several hundred years old, then what you will find is that the buildings have changed. Of course, people have changed, the streets have changed, but the general neighborhoods stay amazingly stable. So once these neighborhoods are formed, they become a stable part of the city. The other example that is discussed in the book is the example of Manchester City. In the period of the early 1800s, Manchester went through a period of rapid growth, growing from a small town into a big city. In all of this period, there was really no central governance or control over how the city grew. But still, in this period, automatically, neighborhoods emerged in a self-organizing manner. So the point is that cities are examples of self-organization, and the interesting point here is that while on an individual's level we are capable of interacting and knowing about 50 different people, so that is the size limitation of a community, we solve the problem of organizing larger groups of cities of hundreds, thousands or millions of people by forming groups within groups and forming neighborhoods. And through this process, we are able to interact with a much larger group of people. The final set of examples involves the internet, and Steven talks about a couple of different examples here. First of all, he talks about Slashdot, which is a community site that emerged at the end of the 1990s. As the site grew and the number of participants grew, there was a problem with content on the site, and that was because some negative content got over-amplified. It was hard to find quality content because the silent majority could not intervene with the more violent minority, and that resulted in a negative overall tendency for the site. And at that time, the creator of Slashdot decided to create a karma system. His approach was to assign the role of moderator always to a different person in the community or a group of different people in the community. And when you had the right of being a moderator, you got a finite number of karma points that you were able to assign to articles, and you could give an article -1 to +5 points. Through the point system, these articles got rated. the better rating an article and an author had, that increased the karma of the author. And also because as a moderator, your role was only temporary and everyone got a chance to be a moderator over time, this became a feedback system. The reason Stephen mentions this is because in case of online communities, we need feedback systems like a karma system. Otherwise, the silent majority cannot voice their opinion, and there's going to be this positive feedback cycle of negative content. As a result, these communities will not work. And ever since then, I think if you think of the different community sites that you participate in today, so remember this book was written 20 years ago, you can see that similar karma or rating systems have become pretty much the standard of the community sites. The second example he mentions is the skeptics who did not believe that online auctions would ever work. I'm putting here eBay as an example, but you can think of other auctioning sites as well, where time has proven that online auctions work, and they work exactly because of the same approach as the online communities work, because over time these auctioning sites have developed feedback loops that helps users identify frauds from real dealers. Finally, Stephen also talks extensively about different computer games that are more self-organizing and generative in nature. And one example he talks about is Simcity, and how a simulation like Simcity can help us understand the self-organizing systems and how they work. So where does all of this lead us? I think what Stephen is highlighting is we should create an environment where we let solutions emerge, and problems such as city traffic are typical problems of organized complexity that are best tackled bottom-up instead of top-down solutions. And he closes his book with this idea that we need to embrace the unpredictable. And here the point is that the emerging higher level behavior of a self-organizing system is impossible to predict or extremely hard to predict. And therefore, by looking for solutions that are not top-down solutions, but bottom-up, self-organizing, emergent solutions, they always carry the risk that you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. So that is my summary of the book. I hope you like that. Now let's talk a bit about some of my reflections on the book. So one set of reflections is a question: how can I apply this in my business environment, in corporate life? Can somehow corporate systems be more ant-like, self-organizing instead of command economies? Here, I'm not going to dive deep into this, just want to mention that in the workshop, one of the other participants mentioned the book Management 3.0, so I have this pamphlet for complex projects from there, and the other example that came to mind are the agile communities and organizing the Spotify way. So these are some connections I created, and here you can see Management 3.0 as the book mentioned. And then the other question that came to mind as I was thinking about the book and creating my permanent notes is: how can I make my own personal knowledge management system emergent? And I'm not going to dive deep into this. I think I'm going to have a separate dedicated video on the subject, but I started to think about ways to apply the idea of emergence to my own personal knowledge management system to facilitate the process of emerging ideas from my system. And finally, about the workshop, I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts, and these are also topics that I'm going to create dedicated videos on. One, Discord as an online classroom has proved to be very effective. And second, the workshop felt like a book club. It was an amazing team and amazing input. I just loved how I learned much more about the book through working with the team than reading the book alone myself. So that is the summary that I wanted to share with you today. And if you're interested, I still have some places left in Cohort 2 starting in January. So please check the description and join Cohort 2 of the Visual Thinking Workshop. And otherwise, I hope to see you in my next video. Thank you.